Mike McCabe is kind of an outsider. He's the only candidate in the Democratic primary for governor who has refused to pledge to support the party's eventual nominee should it not be him. He's set strict contribution limits for his campaign donors, and the only pants he will wear are blue jeans. I'm Jessie Opoien, and this is Wedge Issues, a podcast about the 2018 elections in Wisconsin. We are going to skip the news roundup this week because I am on vacation, and we'll jump right into my conversation with Mike McCabe about what he calls a people-powered campaign for governor.
I'm running for governor because we've reached a point where we have a government that is working spectacularly well for those at the very top, a wealthy and well-connected few. And then as I travel the state, what I find is so many people who feel forgotten or written off. They feel like they don't have a voice. They feel like government is not acting on their behalf. They feel really left out. And they're struggling, both economically and otherwise. They're struggling to keep their heads above water. And they just don't feel the government works for them. And they've got some really strong reasons to believe that. And of course, my life's work has been about trying to expose those forces that lead our government to just work for a privileged few instead of all of us. And we have to shake up and transform that system if we're going to get regular people a voice and get them authentic representation.
I've heard you talk about forgotten people, forgotten places a lot on the campaign trail. What does that mean to you, and how do you propose elevating them and getting them back into the conversation?
I'm talking about people who sometimes are in the inner city and sometimes they're way out in the country, like where I'm from. But what they all have in common is I think they really wonder if anybody at the Capitol even knows they're out there. They don't feel that they have a voice. They don't feel like their concerns or their challenges are being talked about or addressed at the Capitol. They feel written off. And that makes them angry, but it also just leaves them despairing because they wonder if there's a way out of that trap. And so I think that creates a really volatile set of political conditions. And I think what we've seen happen in 2016, so far in 2018, is an indication that people are really hungry for a very different kind of leadership and a new politics. And I just think that we've got a dangerous moment on our hands, both for our state and our country. And I think that means that people who haven't necessarily been interested in the business of governing, we all have to take matters into our own hands and get this state to a better place.
It feels like it's a really negative set of circumstances that you're describing, but it sounds like there's some hope for some positivity in there to come through. Do you think that needs to come from someone who hasn't served an elected office before or hasn't been part of the system that you're talking about?
Not necessarily, but it does have to come from someone who is dedicated to throwing the conventional political playbook out the window and doing things very differently. If what it all comes down to in the end is that candidates continue to spend 4 or 5 hours a day every day asking rich people for money, and then they run a bunch of trashy ads and they get elected, and then they go about doing the bidding of those who supplied them all the money, that gets us nowhere good, and it only deepens the sense of frustration that so many people have. So I've been around the state capitol for a long time. I've been in one capacity or another dealing with state and local government for 35 years. So I know the inner workings of government really well. But what I haven't done is pursued a path that was about getting elected to office. And if that's the only kind of experience that people are looking for, then I'm not your candidate. I have a lot of experience and that's given me a real good understanding of the inner workings of government. But it has been as an independent watchdog. It has been as someone who's worked to try to get the political establishment to change its ways and get regular people in the driver's seat of our government. And I think there's just a crying need for that.
How do you see yourself differently from the other options?
Well, it's a very large field of candidates, obviously, and they're all very accomplished people. What I saw missing and what ended up drawing me into the race was that I didn't see anyone who was committed to really doing politics differently. I'm running a campaign where I don't take any single donation over $200, and nobody else is willing to do that. And what that creates as a challenge for me is that I really have to crowdfund this campaign. I have to get a lot of people willing to give small amounts of money. But much more importantly, We have to rely on grassroots organization. We have to rely on people power. But to me, that's the central challenge of our time. And if we continue to practice politics in a way that plays to money power, that plays right into the hands of our current governor. We have to figure out a way to challenge and overcome that money power with people power. And that's what really brought me into this race. And of course, that's what my life's work has been about. And that's what sets me apart from the rest of the field. I've taken positions over the course of this campaign. In some cases, I was the first to take certain positions, but a lot of the rest of the field would join me after I took those positions. But the one place they leave me alone is this whole question of money in politics. And I think that's what makes me unique in the race. And of course, where I'm from is a factor here as well. I come from a farming background and grew up in Clark County, which now votes overwhelmingly Republican, more Republican than Waukesha County, but used to be represented by Democrats. And we have to be able to compete in places like that. And I think that's something that sets me apart as well.
And you launched your campaign on the farm where you grew up, and you've spent time over the years in the Capitol, outside the Capitol, in the general vicinity of the Capitol, working in different capacities. Describe for me your journey from the farm to running for governor now.
Growing up on the farm is what brings me to this place because it's what gave me my values. And one of the stories I tell a lot is a story of a neighbor who lost his father to suicide. His dad hung himself in the shed from a rafter when the bank was foreclosing and taking the farm away from that family. Well, weeks after losing his dad, and we all went to that funeral and buried that man, and just months before that family was taken off their land, we were trying to harvest crops, and the rains wouldn't stop, and we were burying tractors up to their axles in mud, and this young guy comes down the road and pulls into our field and hooks a chain to our tractor and pulls us through the field so we could harvest corn. And we returned the favor in the days to come and helped them harvest their corn, which they didn't get to benefit from because the bank took that too. But that taught me everything I needed to know about the common good. I mean, that taught me about neighbors looking out for each other, the idea that we're all in this together and you don't leave anybody behind. And at a moment of enormous trauma, he was still looking out for somebody. He was still helping a neighbor. And that was a man who didn't have a high school diploma, never graduated from high school, but was one of the most powerful teachers I ever had in my life. Well, that shaped my politics. That gave me the values that I've got. I became the person I am on the farm. And it gave me a sense of the importance of public service, of being there for others, and I think ultimately has me here at this point of running for governor. But that upbringing is everything to me.
Can you walk me through a little bit your professional career? You've done the watchdog thing. You've started your own advocacy group. Before that, you worked in the Capitol a little bit as a staffer. What did you learn along the way? And in terms of your political identifications, what have you seen change in the Capitol?
Well, one of the interesting things about me is that I once worked a long time ago in the very early 80s for 3 Republican legislators in the state assembly.
Yeah.
But that was a time when there were Nelson Rockefeller liberals in the Republican Party and Teddy Roosevelt or Bob LaFollette Republicans. One of my favorite legislators at the time was a guy named Tiny Krieger who represented Merrill in Marathon County. And he was the last remaining person in the Wisconsin political scene with ties to Bob LaFollette's Progressive Party. And he was serving as a Republican in the state legislature, but he was a man with an enormous heart, tremendous compassion, and he was a true progressive. And then you had Main Street Republicans, sort of moderate Republicans. You had pro-choice Republicans on abortion and pro-life Democrats. So the political culture was so radically different then. And of course, that was also a time when Democrats and Republicans could actually talk to each other and work things out with each other. Mm-hmm. So I go back around in my time around the Capitol, I go back to a time when our political culture was vastly different than it is today. And so I actually, unlike so many of the candidates running these days, they've only ever known the division and polarization and the political dysfunction that we have today. And they're products of that. I go back long enough where I can actually remember when Wisconsin was very different that way. And so I do have experience around the Capitol, but most of my years, decades of it, has been spent in a watchdog role, trying to shine light on, first, it was the way our tax money is used by our government. Later, it was the transactions between wealthy donors and elected officials and how that corrupts our government. And it really was all about trying to get our government to be more responsive to the people. It was to try to revive that spirit of democracy.
You, in terms of political partisan identification, talk a lot about the importance of really not adhering to a party loyalty necessarily. You are the one candidate who said, I'm not going to necessarily pledge to support, if it's not you, the nominee of the Democratic Party, just because it's the nominee of the Democratic Party. Why is that?
We need a new governor. And someone with my values can't very well support Scott Walker.
Sure.
And what I can say is I'm not going to vote for Scott Walker. But I think party loyalty pledges are a mistake. And I think all the other candidates in the race who've been willing to take that party loyalty pledge are making a mistake, because it sends a very, very negative and damaging message to voters. What it says is that these candidates will put party above everything. They'll put party ahead of country. They'll put party ahead of the people. Party trumps everything. And if you have the right letter behind your name, that's who you're going to back, regardless of anything else. And to get a new governor, we have to win over some people who have not voted for the Democratic nominee now 3 different times for governor. Scott Walker has been elected 3 times. And the way to do that is not to say that party is above everything. So I just think party loyalty pledges are a mistake. And I think my feeling is that there's going to be a primary election on August 14th. Let the people decide. Let them have their choices and let them decide. And then after August 14th, that's the time for people to decide which candidate they're going to get behind for the general election.
You mentioned the other area that you have staked out on your own being campaign contributions. How did you set the thresholds? $200 at a time, no more than $1,000 overall from one person over the campaign. How did you set those thresholds?
The $200 figure has meaning to me because I've spent all those decades tracking money in politics. And one of the things I know is that 0.5% of the American population gives 2/3 of all the political money in this country. And the threshold that they are above is $200. Those who give more than $200, and most of them give vastly more than $200, but those who give over $200 give 2/3 of all the political money in this country. And they represent 0.5% of the American population. So this tiny segment of our society bankrolls the campaigns, and then they end up having outsized influence over the decisions government makes. What I've learned is that those people who do most of the giving, what they want our government to do is radically different than what the rest of us want our government to do. And yet they get our government to do that on every issue we care about. And that's where people lose out and a privileged few at the top win. And so, that $200 threshold is very meaningful. If you follow the money and if you look at how money flows in American politics, once you go above $200, you start to see the influence of a few really magnified. So I decided no single donation over $200. We're allowing supporters to give more than once, but not more than a total of $1,000. Now, the legal limit is $20,000 from an individual and $86,000 from the political action committee of a special interest group. But I consider those to be legal bribes because all the work I've done all these years have shown me that there are strings attached to those checks. They expect favors. They get favors on a regular basis. That's what has to stop. And so I feel it's really important to practice what I've preached all these years and lead by example first.
I would assume you would look at a $201 check and think that's probably not like a terrible thing compared to your $200 check. But where, I guess, if you're looking at your opponents and thinking the spectrum between $200 and $20,000, where do you start to feel uncomfortable and think this person, this candidate, is potentially on the hook and being manipulated?
You've got to set a threshold somewhere, and obviously the law used to be a $10,000 donation was the legal limit, and then those who lord over us at the Capitol these days, they decided to double the limit for donations, and they upped it to $20,000 from an individual. And I think if they had their way, they'd take limits off altogether. But the bottom line is when you start seeing 4- and 5-figure checks, those donations get remembered. There's no question about that. And they come from a tiny segment of society, and that segment of society wants influence and they want favors, and they get it. That's the cancer that's growing in the body of our democracy that we have to diagnose and then cure.
We should mention, since people can't see you, you are wearing blue jeans. I've never not seen you wearing blue jeans. Your campaign's got the Governor Blue Jeans theme. Blue Jean Nation was the advocacy group that you started after you left the Democracy Campaign. Where did that take root for you, and why is that theme carrying out through your campaign?
Well, it took root in childhood. I grew up on a dairy farm, and I grew up wearing blue jeans, and so that's how I've dressed my whole life. And I've actually never owned a matching suit where the jacket and the pants are made of the same material. I wasn't even married in a matching suit, and my wife wasn't married in a wedding gown. We were dressed pretty informally for our wedding, and I've never worn a tux in my life. I've never owned a matching suit in my life, and I just felt like it would be phony to put that costume on now and pretend to be fancier than I actually am. And then the other thing, I guess to me, is I am challenging some thinking here. Why is it assumed that it's wrong for an elected representative of the people to dress the way regular people dress? Why is that considered wrong? That kind of thinking, that somehow elected officials have to dress better than regular people dress on a daily basis, that kind of thinking is really, that's the thinking of aristocracy, not the thinking of the ideal of democracy. So I am challenging that thinking here too. It's not just dressing the way I've always dressed, that's part of it, but it's also saying, look, elected officials are supposed to be servants, not masters. They're not supposed to be lording over us. They're not supposed to be above us. They're supposed to be under us, serving us. And so to me, there's also that symbolic impact of wearing blue jeans. It's to send a message that challenges that thinking that elected officials are supposed to dress somehow fancier than regular people dress. Elected representatives, I just don't think there's anything wrong with dressing the way regular people dress if you're an elected representative of the people.
I mean, if you are elected, sometimes regular people have to dress up for things like fancy dinners, ceremonies, funerals, what have you.
I didn't wear a suit to my own wedding, for crying out loud,
Okay.
And so
do you envision a scenario in which you would ever need to wear khakis or a sport coat or something?
Well, I've said all along that people have asked me, are you going to campaign the whole way in blue jeans? And I said, yes, and I'll be inaugurated in blue jeans, and I will govern in blue jeans. And there is nothing wrong with an elected representative of the people dressing the way regular people dress. And so I do challenge that thinking, because I do think it's the thinking of aristocracy and not democracy. And we're supposed to have a democracy. So that's something worth fighting for as far as I'm concerned.
You've also said you would not live in the governor's mansion. You would take a salary of $1 less than the average wage. Is
Correct.
that?
But there again,
But yeah, talk to me about that.
There again, I think governors should be servants and not masters. And to me, that puts a governor under the people, not above them. So I live in a 1,400 square foot house. It's actually the biggest house I've ever lived in my life. And I don't feel right personally moving into a 20,000 square foot mansion after winning an election. And I also feel that if you're going to be true to that ideal that governors are servants and not masters, then taking the full salary of the governor doesn't feel right either. So I've said that I'll be paid $1 less than the average Wisconsin worker makes, and that's a personal commitment. I'm not asking anybody else to join me in taking that position. It's just a personal commitment of mine that if elected governor, that's the way I'm going to conduct myself.
Talking about accomplishments over your career that you're particularly proud of, and maybe some obstacles you faced along the way and how you overcame those.
Well, one of the proudest achievements, of course, was shining light on behavior that ended up erupting into what was known as the caucus scandal, which ended up leading top legislative leaders to be convicted of criminal misconduct. And then after that, I pushed hard for years for ethics reform that would create nonpartisan, independent oversight of government ethics. And that legislation was passed and signed into law, and the Government Accountability Board was established, and it took oversight out of the hands of the hand-picked appointees of top elected officials and created truly independent oversight. And so that was one of the achievements that I'm very proud of. But of course, the current administration and its allies in the legislature demolished that system, and that was just an example of how you can work for years for something, and in a matter of weeks it can be taken away. So you can't ever rest. You just have to be willing to get up and dust yourself off and go right back to work and follow your heart and continue to work for the values that you think are important.
So what would be your priorities if you're elected in take the office of governor?
To me, we have to deal with inequality, both political inequality and economic and social inequality. And we've got an economy that benefits a few, is making the rich vastly richer, and yet so far in the 21st century, no state in America has seen its middle class shrink more than Wisconsin. And we've got levels of economic inequality now in our state not seen since the Great Depression. So we've got an economy that benefits a few at everyone else's expense, and we've got a government that works really well for a few and ignores the wishes of others. And the two are connected. The two feed off each other. The more politically unequal we become, the more economically unequal we become. And as economic inequality grows, that feeds further political inequality. The two feed off each other. So to me, the priority is both to pursue the ideal of democracy and revive democracy and create more political equality, and then also with a living wage for every worker, health care for all, debt-free education for young people, high-speed internet everywhere, use our resources to empower regular working people from the bottom up. Everywhere I go, I talk about geyser economics, how economic prosperity doesn't trickle down, it gushes up, and we've got to change the conversation about how we pursue economic development. We can't just feed the rich and shower tax breaks and state subsidies on a few at the top. We've got to use our resources to empower working people from the ground up. And I think those are the priorities right there, is attacking rising inequality, both political and economic.
Yeah, I got to ask you about that. You talk about geyser economics. You coined a phrase that I hadn't heard before, that I haven't heard you use in a while, but you talked about golden shower economics for trickle down.
Yeah. Because I think an awful lot of people out there who are struggling like crazy to keep their heads above water. I saw a report recently where it said if you're a minimum wage worker, you need 3 jobs to afford housing. 3 jobs. And I know a lot of people out there who are, and they do feel like what the people who are lording over them at the Capitol and are feeding the rich and showering tax breaks and state subsidies on a few with the hope that some of that might filter down to the rest of us. That approach is failing us, and they do feel like they're getting a golden shower. and so that's something that maybe took some people around Madison aback.
Uh-huh.
But I'm telling you, regular folks out there are feeling that way. They're feeling as though they're being mistreated and mistreated badly, and they can connect the dots. They understand that politically, those at the top are being catered to. And that's producing an economy that then enriches a few at everyone else's expense. And it creates enormous anger out there. One of the things I find interesting, Jessie, is that there's tremendous hunger for change all over our state, but the hunger intensifies the farther north you go.
Interesting.
Farther north you go, the people are more and more stirred up. And I think it's because they feel looked down upon, written off, forgotten, and they're mad. And they have every right to be.
So do you think, is there anything that Scott Walker has done well while he's been in office?
Well, what he's particularly gifted at, he's a master political psychologist. He is extraordinarily skillful at pitting people against each other and getting people to see each other as enemies. You think about the rural-urban divide that everybody talks about all the time. I have the blessing of having been able to live in the city and out in the country. So I've straddled those two worlds. And for all the talk of the rural-urban divide, rural and urban people have way more in common than we've been led to believe. The real divide in American politics is not between left and right, it's between top and bottom. And Scott Walker's been really good at being able to push buttons and get people to think of each other as enemies, and he's been able to divide and conquer. So he's been remarkably gifted at doing things that have been to his great political benefit, but it ultimately has weakened our state, and that's why we need a new governor.
I care about this state deeply, and these issues are going to be with me for a long time.
Us talking about a 5-year plan is not helping me. It may be fine for you, but it's not helping me.
Now, whether they're from the community, I don't care. Whether they're from space, I don't care. As long as they can provide the best visual experience for Madison.
Keep hope alive. Keep hope alive.
These are Cap Times Talks, smart conversations about big topics in Madison. Look for Cap Times Talks on iTunes or anywhere else you find podcasts.
All right, are you ready to move on to our lightning round?
Go for it.
Okay, favorite Wisconsin beer?
Spotted Cow.
That's an easy one.
That's an easy one.
That is by far, in a way, the most popular answer to that question.
But the more different brews that New Glarus, for example, comes out with, for me, just for my taste buds, they haven't come out with one that I like better than Spotted Cow. So I keep going back to one of their originals.
Kind of the flagship, yeah.
It is.
Yeah.
But I think for a reason.
Yes, absolutely.
Some people like something even more hoppy.
Right.
Or,
Yeah.
But that hits my sweet spot taste-wise.
Good.
Yeah.
Are you loyal to a particular brand of blue jean?
Lee.
Okay. Why Lee?
Only because they fit me best, and I like them best. I've tried Wrangler, I've tried Levi's, and Lee is actually the one that works best for me.
All right.
So yeah, clear favorite there.
Okay. Yeah. What is the best advice that your parents or a loved one gave you when you were growing up?
My mom told me one time very early in life, she said happiness is spelled O-T-H-E-R-S.
Nice.
That stuck with me.
That's good. Yeah.
That's something she told me.
What is your favorite lake in Wisconsin?
Oh, gosh. I would say Devil's Lake.
Yeah.
And it's not so much because of the water, it's because of the bluffs around it.
Yeah, it's beautiful.
I love hiking up there. There's a whole bunch of lakes
I'm
pretty darn fond of, but I would probably say Devil's Lake.
All right. What about the best concert that you've attended?
Joan Armatrading performed in Wisconsin many, many years ago, and it was the most fun I've ever had at a concert. Al Jarreau at Summerfest one year, a long, long time ago. I really loved that particular concert. Those are probably my two favorites, and those are not exactly your household names among performers.
Definitely not.
I would say Joan Armatrading's was the best I've ever seen.
Wow. Do you know what your first concert was?
I do not.
Okay.
I'm not sure.
Yeah.
I did go to one Grateful Dead concert pretty early, but that was definitely not my first. It was one that stood out, though.
Yeah,
That's a cultural
that
phenomenon.
would stand out, definitely.
Yeah.
Who are your role models in politics?
Bill Proxmire, Bobby Kennedy, Fighting Bob La Follette, for sure. Mahatma Gandhi. Looking more globally.
Sure.
I did a lot of reading of Gandhi's own writings about how he brought about change in India and led the Indian independence movement. He was a fascinating thinker.
Where in Wisconsin do you feel most at home?
You know what? I feel at home everywhere in Wisconsin. I can't think of a place where I feel out of place. I do. To this day, because of my upbringing, I do like to be out in the country. Mm-hmm. I love rural Wisconsin. It has a hold on me. I won't deny that. But boy, you even put me at the Kohl Center for a UW basketball game. I feel really at home. I feel really at home there. I love that too. So, but you can take the boy out of the country, but you can't take the country out of the boy.
Yeah.
And so that love of the rural landscape and rural life is something that I can't quite shake.
Yeah. So you grew up on a farm. Do you have any pets now?
Yeah, we have a cat at home. I actually, that's a huge struggle for me to have a pet indoors. So that is, we have a democracy in our household. I have an 18-year-old son and a wife, and they outvote me 2-1 to have a pet in our house. But growing up on the farm, you just didn't have pets indoors.
Sure, I suppose not.
Dogs were not indoors. Cats were not indoors. And so that's a struggle for me to have an indoor pet. It's not something that I like. It's not something that I feel
that's interesting.
Is natural.
Yeah.
And so that's just because of my upbringing.
Mm-hmm.
They feel very differently. I think my son would have liked to have had a dog too, and I said one indoor pet, that's it. So we have a cat.
Okay. If you had a Wisconsin bucket list, so something really stereotypically Wisconsin that you've either never done or it's been a really long time, what would that be?
I feel like I think I've experienced just about everything you can experience in Wisconsin. Going to Old County Stadium before there ever was a Miller Park, going to Lambeau Field before they spruced it up.
Mm-hmm.
I think I've been to just about every state park that we have in our state. I really feel like I've explored Wisconsin as much as you can, and I deeply love this state. Probably my bucket list has more to do with travel outside of Wisconsin.
Sure, yeah.
Than I've traveled over 85,000 miles for this campaign so far. And I felt like I had traveled this state extensively before that. My work often had me on the road to all parts of Wisconsin, and I've traveled a lot here. So I guess if I ever stop traveling this much in Wisconsin, there is still a bunch of countries I'd like to see.
Yeah, great. Ready for your last one?
Yeah.
Favorite Wisconsin cheese?
Probably Colby. It hits the sweet spot in terms of my taste in cheese, but then also I grew up in Clark County, and Colby was just down the road from where I grew up. And Colby cheese is named for the little town of Colby, which is right in my backyard. So I have a bias. It's not only a cheese that tastes right to me, but it also has that other connection.
Perfect. Well, I will let you leave us with any closing words you want listeners to hear.
Jessie, just thanks for having me, and this has been an absolutely unbelievable journey. The greatest thing about running for governor, as far as I'm concerned, is that this is one of those rare opportunities to travel from bubble to bubble to bubble. We all live in bubbles, of one kind or another, and doing this, I get invited into other people's bubbles, and it gives you an amazing insight into how people are living and what challenges they face. This whole experience has been an amazing privilege.
Thank you for listening to Wedge Issues. We'll be back every week with new episodes, so make sure you're subscribed so you can stay up to date. If you have suggestions or feedback, you can leave us a rating or review on iTunes, or you can tweet at me at Jessie Opoien or email me at jopoien@madison.com. Join us next week for a conversation with the Democratic candidate for governor who's been leading in the polls, Tony Evers. See you then.